Aloha, welcome to Netra's News. This is Netra Halperin, and I'm very pleased we're going to be continuing the series on sustainable solutions. And this time it's on wastewater purification. I know it's a topic you're all thinking about, and let's learn more about it. So tonight we have in the studio Robin Knox, an environmental scientist.
Hello, Netra. Thanks for having me back on your show.
Yeah, you were on here before discussing flooding.
That's correct.
So all in the same realm of water.
That's my specialty.
Your specialty. And tonight we also have Travis Liggett.
Hi, Netra.
And you are a design engineer.
This is true, yes.
And that you formerly worked with NASA.
Yes, I worked at NASA Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley for 7 years, working in life support and developing different systems to support living things like astronauts and life science experiments.
Wonderful. And I guess you're going to be talking about algae tonight.
I am, yeah.
Wonderful. So I guess maybe I'll give each of you a couple minutes and just kind of talk about why are there sustainable solutions to wastewater treatment needed? What's going on with our wastewater system that needs improvement, and what needs to become more sustainable?
Well, Netra, I'd like to start by saying, a lot of people have a lot of fear about the year 2012 and what's going to happen in 2012. But I'm really excited about 2012 because it's a celebration for me. It's the 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act.
Wow.
And many people don't remember the days before the Clean Water Act, but Travis and I both do. We both had very personal experiences where we were impacted by pollution. And that, in both of our cases, inspired us to go into the field of pollution control. That, according to the Government Accounting Office, the Clean Water Act has been the most successful statute ever passed in terms of accomplishing its goals, because it has a high degree of accountability.
Okay.
But when we centralized systems and we built collection systems, we built treatment plants, and we brought everything to one place in order to treat it effectively, we kind of had some unintended consequences.
Okay.
Maui County in particular suffers for some of these consequences. For instance, we have to pump the water around a lot to get it to the central systems and to get it from the homes to the treatment plant. And if we wanted to reuse it, we would have to pump it to wherever it was reused.
Right.
And that takes a lot of electricity, which right now, because we're using a lot of fossil fuels to generate it, it contributes to global warming, causes a lot of environmental problems. So one problem is the amount of energy that it takes to treat wastewater the way we're doing it right now with the fuel source we're using right now is not sustainable. Some people have thought, the Clean Water Act caused all this pollution, but really it's our source of fuel that's causing the problem. But another problem that we have with the most widely used kinds of systems is that they create residual waste that we have to get rid of as well. So when you treat the wastewater, as we'll talk about later on with some slides to explain, when you treat the wastewater, you end up with some solids that have to be removed from the wastewater, and then those solids have to be disposed of. So the main thing I'd like people to learn about wastewater treatment is there's no one-size-fits-all answer, and you really have to understand that it's a process. And so we're going to talk about that process tonight, what some of the non-sustainable aspects of our current systems are, and maybe some innovative ideas for solutions. Sustainable solutions.
Obviously. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So Travis.
Yes. So my path to this moment has been very different than Robin's. As I mentioned, I was an engineer at NASA, and I participated in a project called GREEN, which was global research into energy and the environment at NASA. Something that NASA hadn't really done, which is look back down at the Earth. And the project looked at many things, and one of the ideas that came out of it was a new way to deal with our waste. And this was based on closed ecological life support systems, which are really in theory right now, that we would send people up in space with living systems like plants or something else, and recirculate the air and such. what's done so far is similar to what's done on Earth, which is really in one end and out the other.
Okay.
You know, we consume and we release the waste products. And so as a team, we looked at this and came up with a way to really close that loop. You know,
Okay.
we have a lot of wastes and a lot of problems as a result of those wastes. And a way to shift our thinking is to look at those wastes as resources.
Exactly.
And really capitalize on them. So that's
Exactly.
It's a novel idea to use wastewater to create really wealth and clean water, fuel, and other things that we need.
And if each of you wanted to talk about, because I'm thinking the average person out there is thinking, okay, wastewater treatment, like how glamorous is that? But will shifting our treatment of wastewater, will that create something really exciting that shifts everything?
Absolutely. There's several aspects to consider. One of the things I learned, I was formerly a permit writer. I wrote wastewater discharge permits under the EPA programs. And EPA had a special program called Small Community Outreach, where I would go to small towns and advise their councils and their mayors, teach them about wastewater treatment so that they understood why they needed to fund it. And what we found out in that program is that once communities really learned about their wastewater treatment and what was needed, they were totally behind getting the funding to do it. And once those new wastewater treatment plants that were really good were built, they were so proud of them. And we found out that civic pride was actually a very important factor in achieving the kind of water quality goals that we want. Because of course the point of wastewater treatment is to keep those wastes from causing a problem once we release them.
Right. And to keeping our oceans clean, and keeping our drinking water clean, and basically health and safety.
Right, it is very important. Many people don't see the connection between what we dispose of in waste and what's happening in our drinking water. And they might look here and say, well, the source of our drinking water is way up at the top of the hill, and the waste disposal is at the bottom of the hill, so how could it possibly get back in to our drinking water? But what we know over history is that contaminants enter the global cycle. Chemicals are moved through the cycle by single-celled organisms primarily, and which some of are used for wastewater treatment. We're going to talk about some of that today. But maybe it would be helpful if we looked at what wastewater treatment actually is so that people could understand more about that.
Okay, and one thing I wanted to mention is, like you were talking, Travis, about for the astronauts, we're looking at closed system. But isn't actually, in effect, the Earth a closed system? And because it's so huge, we delude ourselves into thinking it's not. And that's kind of how society has been behaving, or let's just say Western society has been behaving. It's just like use it, throw it away, use it, throw it away. But it's actually a closed system. It's just very big closed system.
Absolutely. Buckminster Fuller is one of my idols, and you know, he had this term spaceship Earth. You know, it turns out we're already on a spaceship.
Yeah.
It happens to be something like alive.
Yeah.
And we haven't really designed our systems to fit into this greater living system.
Right.
And I think, you know, when I think of 2012, it's an awakening to this interconnectedness, which extends also to our wastewater. You know, especially here in Maui. I love Maui. I've been here for 2 years. I first came here 25 years ago. And I came from a place where the rivers kind of run dead. Confined feeding operations, agriculture in the Midwest. And I was astounded to see the reefs here when I was a kid, you know, in '85. But, you know, that's really changed. And I think if we can't do it here, we really can't do it anywhere, because this is like the crown jewel of our country here. So.
Exactly. Okay, so let's look at those slides about wastewater treatment and injection wells.
That would be great. We could just define a few terms so that people know what we're talking about. So, as I said, wastewater treatment is a process, and it's got a number of different steps. And the first one is called primary treatment. And that's basically just the removal of gross solids And when engineers or scientists say gross, they're meaning large, but they're also gross. They really are. And this is actually usually one of the stinkiest parts of a wastewater treatment plant, because you're taking out a lot of big stuff, a lot of fats and things, and they usually have a number of steps, which we're going to look at on the next slide, that show additional unit operations. That picture you saw there was a screen. It's a primary screen. If you look at this slide, on the left-hand side, we have the primary treatment. The raw sewage comes in, and it's screened. We do, like I said, I just showed you a picture of the Kihei screening. Then there can be grinders, because there's often large objects that come in. And then all of that goes into a grit chamber, and it's removed from the process. Then in many treatment plants, then there's a primary separation of solids called primary clarification. The plants that I've been on Maui don't have primary clarifiers. They use a different way to get their solids out. Then that water goes out and goes to the secondary process, but the solids coming out of the primary treatment are something that must be dealt with and disposed of in addition to the water. So you have to, whenever you're looking at process, think about in and out. Everything that goes in has to come out, and there has to be a balance. Some things can get transformed in the process, and that's kind of magical. And that's what happens in the secondary treatment process. So if we can go back to the full screen view of that drawing again. No, the previous slide. Yeah, so the secondary treatment removes organic materials, and it reduces ammonia, and it reduces solids. And these things are done in different unit operations. The most common is to use biology, because that takes the least amount of energy and chemicals and other things that cost money. So the activated sludge process, what happens is that the microbes that are naturally in our waste, you don't have to add any microbes, they're already there, will actually eat the waste as food. And when they eat the waste, of course, they build and they reproduce, so they make new microbes, and that's called biomass. And in the process of doing that, they transform some of the harmful chemicals. For instance, ammonia, which can be very toxic to fish, gets transformed to nitrates, which can be toxic. For instance, it could be toxic to humans if it was in drinking water in enough concentrations, but it's much less toxic than ammonia is to fish. So it's a positive transformation. And then the next unit operation after those kind of chemical transformations is, again, a separation of solids, because we've grown up all these microbes and we don't want to discharge them to the environment. So you have to remove all of those solids. And that's, again, where you can come into some issues with treatment. If we can look at a full screen view of that slide, we will see, if you look in the right-hand corner, well, the picture in the back here is an activated sludge process that's operating pretty well. The picture in the right-hand corner, you see a lot of the solids are actually floating on top of the water, all that kind of fluffy stuff. Excuse me. And that's a problem, because we need to remove those solids. So most of the treatments are designed to settle the solids down, but there are conditions that can occur in a treatment plant that make them float to the top or not settle properly. So handling the solids is a big one of the challenges, sustainability challenges with wastewater treatment. All those solids that you remove have to go somewhere. They have to be, either digested or further processed. Often they go to a landfill. In some places, if they're clean enough, if there's not a lot of other contaminants in them, they can be beneficially reused, say as compost or fertilizer for plants. But we can't use it for growing food if it has a lot of toxic chemicals in it. And when we take pharmaceuticals and other things into our bodies, that comes out in our waste, so it's in our wastewater. So some of those toxic chemicals are actually things that are medicinal in the right amount for the right species, but can be toxic in other amounts for other species.
Or other people.
Or other people even, yeah. Next process would be disinfection. And that's a really important process for removing harmful bacteria that can cause diseases. And that can be done with chlorine or with UV light. And so one of the challenges we have on Maui is we don't have enough disinfection capacity at all of our treatment plants. So while we're able to disinfect the part of the water that we reuse, we're not able to disinfect all of our wastewater. So the part that goes down the injection wells for disposal is not disinfected or it wasn't at the time that I first investigated it. I know that there is movement underway to disinfect the effluent at Lahaina. So I think we're making progress. And again, it's the 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. Let's celebrate our progress.
Is there a slide for that one?
There is a slide. You might want to find the one with the injection well on it, because many people don't know what an injection well is. And I think it's important to understand that an injection well is not wastewater treatment. It's a method of disposing of the wastewater after you've treated it.
Right.
So an injection well is basically a hole in the ground that's deeper than it is wide. That's the regulatory definition. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you see an injection well, and that's what they look like from the surface. All you see is the piping and the valve on the top. The right-hand side is if you go to the EPA website and look at injection wells, they have a diagram that shows you all the different types of injection wells. Some are used for hazardous waste. They're used widely in oil fields for disposal of salt water, where they inject the salt water back into the saltwater formation. But on Maui, we use injection wells widely for wastewater disposal or stormwater disposal. And that water, when it goes through the injection well, reaches our groundwater. And if you understand the hydrology of the Hawaiian Islands, you know that the groundwater is moving into the ocean. And so if we inject contaminants, like our waste, into the groundwater, it will eventually move out into the ocean. And compared to continental systems and systems on other islands that I've worked on, Maui seems to have kind of a fast flushing system. So problems can show up sooner, is the moral of that story.
Is that because there's a lot of volcanic rock?
Well, I think that's part of it. The hydrology has a lot of fractures in it, the geology has a lot of fractures in it that, open spaces, void spaces that can let water move through. And we also have some kind of direct conduits in some cases, like lava tubes, or recently I've become aware of what's called karst geology or karst hydrology, which is limestone that from coral from many millennia ago. Okay. And when the rain comes down through the volcanic lava rock, it etches pathways into that soft calcium carbonate of the coral skeletons, which some people would call limestone after it's been, there for eons. So this actually forms an underground piping system. So I've just started to research this, so I really don't know how many karsts we have on Maui, but it's certainly a question that we should be researching before we start injecting water, especially with contaminants there. And we're talking about sustainability, so there's also another side of the water equation, and that's water supply.
Yeah.
And so we're throwing away roughly 12 million gallons of fresh water every day, that if we could clean it up more and disinfect it, we could reuse it for irrigation, for watering animals. There's been some need to reduce herd sizes for the ranches because they need water for their cattle, and we have a huge problem with axis deer. They come down, they eat the farmer's fruit and produce because they're seeking water. They come into Wailea, to the golf courses to get water. So, we know that we could do better with our wastewater than throwing it on the reef, where the nutrients make a very rich environment. The wastewater, what we think of as waste, is really not waste. The term wastewater should not even exist. Those waste are food for single-celled organisms that live out in the ocean. just like it's food in the treatment plant. I mean, really all we've done with the treatment process is put Mother Nature in the box.
And what about fish ponds? Don't they work in that manner?
Fish ponds are a little bit of a different beast, but definitely related. If we want to have fish ponds and we want to be able to grow food in them, we need to make sure that the water coming into them is clean, and that means not only controlling sewage and our own waste, but also controlling runoff and erosion and contamination on the land. Anything you put on the land washes out when it rains.
So do you want to give some comments?
Yeah, I wanted to add, what I am talking about is what happens to that wastewater once it's been through this process that you've described. And I want to talk a little bit about what happens once those nutrients, it's really a rich nutrient broth. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, these major plant nutrients, are simply released. And so what happens are these zones, I mean, here is not as bad as many places, but places like the Gulf of Mexico and the Baltic Sea, massive, thousands of square miles of area receive this nutrient-rich broth, basically. And then what happens is the algae simply consume it. And then those algae die, and then they rot. And that rotting process actually pulls every last bit of oxygen out of the entire water column. So what happens in these areas is the fish kind of just float to the top in the worst case scenario. I mean, it's really a terrible thing. And what we're seeing in places like Ma'alaya is that in 1995, correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, it was 75% covered. This is 95.
Right.
75% covered with some of the most diverse reef in the world.
Rare and diverse.
Rare and diverse. And in 2004, it was 8.
Yes.
So this is happening
this is a
not
tragedy.
one generation ago, and in one generation it will be over. It's happening now. It's happening, within these decades. So, this resource, this rich fertilizer that we're releasing, is actually killing the reefs, and it's doing it very rapidly. And so, it's a good lead into what we're trying to do, which is simply receive that nutrient-rich broth and do something with it.
Yeah.
A lot of the recycling programs here, the water recycling, mostly in Kihei and Lahaina, that's sort of what is done already, is the water is recycled onto golf courses. But what we think can be done is actually sort of lasso and harness that process of dead zone formation and allow the algae to consume it in a controlled manner.
Okay.
Right? And so what happens is the algae simply consume all the nutrients, and then what you've got is biomass, algae. And the algae can be converted into fuel. So you're cycling it back in. And so that's really what our process looks to do, is stop this real craziness of putting this resource into a place where it's harming the foundation of the tourist industry.
Exactly.
It's insanity.
And how can you harness it as biomass and make it into fuel?
Well, this might be a good chance to look at a diagram that I brought. It's
okay.
This diagram is from the website of a company called Algae Systems. Algae Systems are some truly wonderful and talented people that came into NASA while I was there, and they have licensed this technology. I left NASA to work with them, and if I could maybe throw my graphic up and I'll talk a little about what this company is trying to do.
While they're doing that, I just wanted to say I'm glad you brought up the issue of dead zones in the ocean, and that's kind of a premature aging of water bodies called eutrophication. And we see the early signs of that on Maui. It's definite. And so it's like you said, right now is the time to act, because we're already on that slope of decline, and we can't wait or it'll be too late.
Right, correct. So
okay, so your slide was there, so I'm
oh,
sure
was there? Okay,
yeah,
we're
so
ready.
I'm sure they'll put it back up. There it is.
So what you're looking at here is 2 slides. Okay, there we go. It's not a technical diagram. It's more of an illustration. What you'll see on the right is a city toward the right there, and coming out of the bottom of that is wastewater. And we're sort of abbreviating here that it's going through a waste processing system, but the way we have it going into the ground is not too far off from what's done here in Maui. But what we're doing differently in this diagram is the wastewater is going into a system that floats on water. This can be done offshore, or it can be done onshore in areas that we have created something like fish ponds, kind of. You know, it's a very same kind of appearance, but floated these systems. And what these systems are if you see on the left, they're in the water there, that could be on the ocean or in an onshore area. What it is sort of like a leaf, if you will. It's a plastic enclosure that sort of not simulates, but gives rise to photosynthesis on the wastewater. So you receive it in, the wastewater sort of flattens out, it levels itself, it floats on the salt water, and then what you're also doing is you're pumping in CO2. If you look here, I'm going to kind of illustrate. Okay. Let's go back full screen. I think that's better.
Yeah, full screen.
Yeah. So just left of the city, you see a power plant with the 2 smokestacks there. But what's interesting about this is there's nothing coming out of those smokestacks. What we're doing with the exhaust, or the CO2, is combining it with the wastewater for the other input that the algae need to grow, which is CO2. Algae need water, nutrients, CO2, and sunlight. So we pump our 2 waste streams, our wastewater and our CO2, into these enclosures, which are floating on water, probably onshore, an acreage onshore that we've converted to algae growth. And those 2 combine with sunlight, and in 12 days, you get a full harvest. Now this contrasts with a terrestrial crop, which, where I'm from in the Midwest, is 12 months.
Wow.
So that really gives you a sense of how much more quickly the algae reproduce than, say, terrestrial plants, which, by the way, a lot of people are looking at terrestrial plants to grow biofuels, which is a completely different conversation, but doesn't make a lot of sense. But so we've got our 2 waste streams flowing out into these floating systems, and then what we get back is algae, a slurry of algae that's mostly water still. And then what's done is that the algae is allowed to come in contact with a membrane, and that membrane has the algae solution on one side and salt water on the other. And what that does is pulls all of the clean water through a membrane so that the algae and other impurities are left behind for processing. And the water is then returned to the ecosystem in a state that is nutrient neutral, which means that all these nutrients that are killing the reef have been removed.
Wow.
And so what we do with that algae solution once the water is removed is process it using new processes that have been developed for converting algal biomass to fuel. And if we go back to the graphic one more time, we can see that to complete the loop on the top, we've got fuel coming out, and that can be put into our airplanes, as you see flying above, back into our cities, or into our cars. And then one final byproduct that we get is a substance called biochar. And biochar is actually a very rich soil enrichment, and that can be used to maybe revitalize some lands here. So you've got basically what you call a closed loop system. That's what we call it in life support, as opposed to an open loop system. And we're taking our wastes and converting wastewater and CO2 into clean water, fuel, and fertilizer, all things that we need here.
I'm sorry, I'm not a scientist, so could you explain again the part about the fuel, like how that gets turned into, especially like airplane fuel. Once I was talking to the president of Hawaiian Air, and what was I talking about? Biodiesel or something, and he said jet fuel needs to be, it's almost like, anyway, it's a very high flash point. And
right.
And so, and you obviously don't want to fool around with jet fuel. You can't have
Correct.
Planes falling out of the sky. So how can this be turned into jet fuel?
Well, it turns out that the critical path of this technology is not the conversion of the biomass into fuel. Although it is a brand new technology, there are many efforts, including the Department of Energy and the Navy and small companies that have pretty much gotten that under control. The challenging aspect of algae for fuel is growing that biomass at a cost that's competitive with the petroleum industry. And so this technology contrasts with what exists, which are often in open ponds and closed bioreactors. systems that have to date not been rendered economic enough to proceed. But this technology, because it leverages basically these waste streams as inputs and uses the water column upon which the system sits for free mixing and cooling and all the things that you'd have to do mechanically, the energy balance does work out so that it's cost competitive. But the process, I am not an organic chemist. Transesterification is one of the words that you can Google, but it's basically a high temperature, high pressure process that converts the biomass into energy.
Okay.
So it's a known process.
And what is the cost differential between what it costs now and what it I mean, as we know, the cost of fuel, either getting it from abroad or digging it up, I guess, mining it, no, what is it called?
It's mining.
Mining.
When you get crude oil out of the ground, it's mining.
Mining it. And as we know, that changes, and the cost of oil is not necessarily related to the cost of mining it, because as you know, the prices fluctuate, and the cost of mining it doesn't dramatically change. But I guess given a average of what it costs to get fossil fuel, how is that compared?
Well, that's kind of the trillion-dollar question. You know, the Navy's also working on some of these problems, but the short answer is we don't know yet. And the stage of development that this technology is at the pilot stage. So what we need to do now is do it at a scale that's larger than what's been done at NASA, which is, as I understand it, not too much bigger than this room, and do it up to many acres so that we can actually determine and prove the economic viability, which, like it or not, is the bottom line.
Right.
Yeah. So that we're at the stage where we need to actually quantify that, and I think there are many reasons why Maui or one of the Hawaiian Islands might be a good place to try it. Believe it or not, I think that the human aspect, which is convincing people that it's needed and doing the permitting and all the other things, is really, I think, the tall pole no matter where you do it. I think one of the benefits is that people in Maui just seem to be more aware of this. You know, I go see my Auntie Nani in Kipahulu. That's what we talk about for breakfast is water. You know, they're Hawaiians. Water is like, it's a big deal. Yeah. It's not just a material substance. And so I think that Maui has sort of the personality, and it's a place of development. I think it's ready for something like this.
Well, in Hawaiian, vai, as in water, means rich.
Right.
Meaning lots of water. So, and you are working with a group. I know you're not going to go into depth on that, but here in Hawaii, in Maui?
I'm sort of, on the cutting edge of trying to find out if this could work here. The truth is that a pilot site is being sought somewhere on Earth. It's my feeling that Maui could be a good place for this. So I'm working on my own right now, and looking forward to being joined here by the company soon.
Yeah. I'd like to address just some of as an environmental scientist, some of the great benefits of what Travis talked about. You know, sequestering the CO2, bringing that CO2 from the treatment, from the electrical plant emissions into it. That's a benefit. Not transporting fuel with fossil fuel 2,500 miles across the ocean. That's a huge environmental benefit. I'm also, the nitrogen neutral is a huge benefit, but the nutrients are not just the major nutrients that Travis mentioned. Some of the UH studies have, there's indications that maybe the micronutrients might be at play, and it would be a lot of study to even figure out which one was the limiting factor of controlling the process. So the beauty of this process of using algae is whatever it is that's limiting the growth, these algae are going to consume it. So we don't have to figure out what the answer is. We just feed the algae. I can't wait to see how this really works on Maui, because another thing that's come out of the research on the reefs and the algae is that we have the highest primary productivity rate on the planet in the areas where our injected wastewater is feeding these algae blooms. So that means faster. It's doing more faster. So Travis already thinks this is a great process. It may be, and that Maui's a great place to do it. it may be really great because all of our sunlight and energy and all the conditions are just optimum for these algae to thrive and rapidly degrade the waste.
Right. So turning something bad into something good.
Yeah, it turns out in the lab that the algae love wastewater. I mean, their growth rates were amazing, and the scientists I work with, they pointed out to me that there are many different forms of nitrogen available in wastewater, whereas if you give them an off-the-shelf nutrient solution, which is what scientists usually give their algae, called BG11, it didn't grow as well as wastewater. So
that was confirmed in our experiments here. We tried pure nitrogen versus the wastewater, and the growth curves did not take off with pure nitrogen, but they did. And that was Megan Daler's work, Megan Daler, University of Hawaii Botany. And to me, it was very telling as an environmental scientist. When I saw her work, I just got excited about what we could do. You said turning something that's a problem into a solution. I mean, many people for years saw environmental protection as a black hole where the money went. Yeah. And I worked for the corporate, Fortune 500 petroleum refineries, people like that. When they were forced to treat their wastewater, and they did it, they found out they saved money, because the secret is there's energy in the wastewater, and the energy is worth money. And so they found that conserving water and removing pollutants could actually generate energy and save money. And so, and in fact, in one of the companies I worked for, BASF Corporation, which is the world's largest chemical corporation, they actually started having an internal accounting system of charging for waste treatment so that people would appreciate it and see, and from my own perspective, economic development happens when you do environmental protection. I am from a place where there was a lot of collapse of ecosystems, and I can tell you it is not good for the economy. And especially, I mean, it's not even good for a petroleum refining economy, much less a tourism-based economy.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So, and in fact, one of the good things that BP Oil is doing in the Gulf right now is the research and the promotion of tourism there, because of all the attention and money. There's now actually a better tourist economy there than there was before the spill.
Yeah. So it's the same concepts of sustainability that we talked about last show, that there's always this idea that having the environment be beautiful, or educating children, or treating people well is at odds with making money. Now, I mean, it may, if you want to, how it's set up kind of now, where there is kind of as they say in Occupy Wall Street, the 1%, but the overall economy is absolutely degrading. The overall health and well-being of everyone is degrading, and it doesn't need to be this way. We can use all these creative solutions and improve things.
That's right. Where others people see problems, we see opportunity.
Yeah.
Those problems are our opportunities to develop our economy, because believe me, the world needs this kind of technology. We can develop technologies and tools here that we can export to the world, and especially to other Pacific islands, because on Maui we have the means. We have the people like Travis here, and some of the most talented and people in the world here on Maui. So I agree with Travis. If we can't do it here, we probably can't do it anywhere on the planet. So let's do it here and export that to the world as part of our economic development.
And I've talked to a number of people around the island, and they share what I see in my mind's eye, which is that Maui should be what it seems like it could turn into, which is a mecca for this type of thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of, in some ways, a perfect experiment, because it's not very often, in this country at least, where you get an island that's not too big, not too small, that you can draw a line around it and really solve the problems. It could be an example, kind of like an antibody, copy it. You know?
And that's, I guess, called ecotourism, or
Right.
I don't know, renewable energy tourism, but basically using what we have, which is the beauty, the great weather, and then attracting people with that additional aspect of how we're changing our economy and changing how we're dealing with our resources, managing our resources, and I think it's a win-win.
Yeah. Well, there's the human aspect. There's all these benefits, for the people that live here, and it would be a great, reputation for the island. But what I'm kind of talking about in terms of experiment is the technical side.
Yeah.
Because if we say went to somewhere like Oahu, there's no way that a system could be implemented that could feasibly handle everything in a reasonable amount of time.
Because it's so big.
And other places may not have a municipal system that has the output that we need as input. But Maui's, it's definitely got a significant wastewater system, but it's not a huge city where you wouldn't be able to see the benefits. For example, Ma'alaya, 300,000 gallons of wastewater go into those reefs eventually every day.
Wow.
And it's not treated to the same levels as the municipal wastewater. That's manageable. We could, in my mind, we could turn Ma'alaya around with our pilot. But
wow, that would be exciting. They would love you. They would be, all the Ma'alaya residents would be bowing at your feet. I mean, that would be.
I want to qualify. I am speaking as Travis Liggett. I'm not technically representing algae systems, but I believe it.
And can your company do that? Can you have access to that?
I can't really speak for them, but what I do know is that it's at the stage where a pilot site is needed.
Yeah.
And the truth is that I don't think anyone cares where it is.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of logic in it being here. So.
And are you looking for investors?
I can't really go into that, to be honest.
Okay. So maybe he
I will refer you
maybe
to the
he
website.
isn't.
I refer you to the website, and if anybody's interested, please contact the partners.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's algaesystems.com, by the way. There it is.
So tell me, how could this affect? I know another issue on Maui is drinking water, and of course we've got the water meter waiting lists, and I did talk to the USGS, and they talked about the water table underneath, etc. How would this affect that? How would this affect? Like you said, if we could obviously, I know what I was going to say. In the beginning, you talked about part of the problem with our system is that it's very centralized. And so there's a lot of energy spent bringing all of the wastewater to those places. And I've heard, let's see, I think Steve Parabicoli and Russell Sparks, they were talking about having lots of small plants. And then they were saying that the people that would be implementing those plants used to work for the county. So they're the same people, the same knowledge body. And and I know that Everett Dowling was going to do that with McKenna.
Well, again, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and there's actually several different things being discussed there in what you just mentioned. But one of the things that the county has been looking at, there is a thing called scalping, where you put some smaller plants around, and as we talked about before, handling the solids is a big part of the wastewater problem. So in that case, they would separate the solids from the water at regional plants, and the solids would go to the big main plant for digesting, but the water itself is kind of like gray water. So it could be used more at the location where the scalping occurs.
Okay.
So that's one thing. Other things that can happen are things that are already happening on Maui. They're due to the lack of availability of county collection and treatment systems. Many developments build their own wastewater treatment plants, such as McKenna Resort that you mentioned. That from a management and regulatory standpoint, in terms of protecting the water resource, can get to be problematic. We already have problems. If you look at the Department of Health website, every year they do an environmental report card, and they grade themselves on how well they're doing. And in every one of them that I've looked at, they've given themselves a very low score, like a D, on injection wells. And the primary reason is they're behind on the permitting. So creating large numbers of small plants that need to be permitted could be an issue if we don't also allocate money for looking out for the quality of our waters and managing that with Department of Health level. So that's one concern. The other is, very small plants don't have a lot of operational flexibility. You can put in what are called package plants, and they can be up to 1 million gallons a day, and they're kind of almost off-the-shelf activated sludge plants in most cases. And the problem with those is that if you get 30 of them, it's a lot more problematic from an operation and maintenance dollar amount than having one bigger plant. And that's what happened in my hometown in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They had literally 150 or more package treatment plants on individual subdivisions, or like at Myalaya, that's what they have there. They have 13 or 12, 11 yep. Treatment plants there. And so what happened was the operation and maintenance wasn't being adequately handled, and also as pollution control is kind of a stepwise process. So you control it a certain amount and you see, is that good enough by monitoring the environment? And if it's not good enough, you control a little more. Well, over the years, the treatment standards had gotten more stringent. Now you have 30 plants that need to be upgraded to more stringent treatment, and that can be very costly. So you've got 30 plants to manage, 30 plants to operate and maintain, and 30 plants that have to be upgraded in treatment. And it literally cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was very costly. What was also very costly was the resistance. To resist going to the higher level of treatment cost the city of Baton Rouge millions and millions and millions of dollars that, in my opinion, could have been more effectively spent on just designing the new treatment. And ultimately, that's where they ended up after 20 years of battle and spending millions of dollars litigating and debating rather than treating. Yeah. And you mentioned drinking water earlier. 12 million gallons a day. We are having drinking water shortages and telling people they can't build on their property because they don't have water supply. And we're throwing away 12 million gallons a day of water that could be reused. Right now, potable water is used for irrigation on this island, and that's a little bit crazy. The other thing we need to think about is global climate change, and whether or not, whatever the cause is, it really doesn't matter because it's changing and rainfall patterns are changing. So the amount of fresh water we're getting, we actually have analyzed the data provided by, I call it the cowboy rainfall data because it was given to us by the ranches. It was collected by cowboys over the last almost 100 years. And we do see that in that data that the volume of overall rainfall, the volume of water falling on us is less. The drought periods are longer and more intense, and then the storms, when they do come, are more intense, more rain in a shorter period of time. The effect of that has been pretty devastating in North Kihei. We not only had flooding last year, but it really was a flood of mud. It was the land was literally sliding off the face of the earth into the ocean, right through Kihei. And that is because of these effects of less rain, longer drought, the vegetation dies, then there's nothing to hold the soils. Right. So one of the things we could do with wastewater, other than make biofuel out of it, or we could do with the treated water, is to irrigate those dry gulches and start planting plants, and that will help restore some of the hydrology, that will help hold the soil there so that it all doesn't end up in the ocean. So if we could take our sewage out and our contaminated runoff out, we wouldn't have to worry about reef restoration. My experience with the environment and controlling pollution is if you just stop the assault, the system will come back. Right. It may not be those rare corals that were at Myalaya before, but I'm pretty sure that some coral would come back and we would have increased coral cover and less algae if we put in some kind of treatment system at Myalaya that was sustainable.
And I just want to remind people, this is a call-in show, 873-3430. So if you have any questions for Robin or Travis, please give us a call. So anyway, so you want to stop the assault, stop the environmental assault.
Yes, yes. The systems are very resilient until you break them, and that is an important thing to understand. you can, you know, do a certain amount of pollution, and you can develop and grade and alter that ecosystem that naturally processes that pollution, and it might seem like everything's okay, nothing happens. And you keep putting different stressors on the system, and because it's very resilient, it doesn't crash right away. It can sustain itself because it's got, you know, all kinds of strategies for dealing with stress. But if you get too many stressors, you can actually break it, and then the resilience is gone, and that's when you get dramatic ecosystem decline. And that is what is very devastating to people and to society. And I saw that happen in Louisiana, and I don't want that to happen on Maui. So I am dedicated to us finding a better way here. I work a lot with fishermen, and I have to tell you, quite frankly, they get a little bit upset when people want to control, for instance, the uhu fishery. The uhu are the parrotfish. They're the lawnmower of the reef. They eat the algae. So right now, that is a critical fishery for us because our reefs are being overgrown with algae. They need the fish to eat the algae so that the coral can survive. But if you tell people, especially subsistence fishermen that are doing it for their food, or people who are doing it as part of their cultural practice, when you tell them, you can't fish out there, and then at the same time you say, but we're not willing to stop throwing our waste out there that's, you know, contributing to this problem, that doesn't go over so swell with those people.
Yeah.
You know, they get a little upset about that because it doesn't quite seem fair to take someone's food away because you don't want to treat your waste.
Exactly. Can you tell us the story about the turtle with the what are they called?
The tumors.
The turtle with tumors.
I will. It was a very profound experience for me. I was trying to make a decision. I came to Maui from commercial consulting, from the mainland where environmental scientists are very respected and sought after, and they make a lot of money, quite frankly. It's a really good industry to be in. And I came to Maui, and it was just really hard for me here because I saw that the Clean Water Act wasn't fully implemented, and that as a result there were all these problems. Like we know now that the virus that causes the turtle tumors is a human virus, and we don't know where it's coming from, but certainly our wastewater should be one of the suspect sources. And so I was trying to decide, what do I do? Do I stay in commercial consulting, you know, working for developers in petroleum refineries and things like that? Or do I start working in the public, you know, like with grants and doing research at the university and trying to really understand and solve these problems? And I was trying to decide. I was swimming out at Ahihi, and I'm swimming along, and something comes up behind me, you know, out from under a shelf under the reef, and, you know, the instant thing is shark. That was the first thing I thought, you know. And I turn around, and it's not a shark, it's a turtle. And this turtle had worse tumors of any turtle that I've ever seen. It had tumors so heavy hanging over its eyes that it was lifting its head up to look at me. It had tumors so much around its mouth that I didn't see how it could eat. And it had so many tumors on its front flippers right where they go into the shell that I didn't see how the turtle could protect itself from the sharks. And I just looked at this poor being, and it was so affected that I couldn't even understand how it was alive. And I instantly became pure compassion. And I heard the Dalai Lama's voice, and he said, "This is compassion." And that's when I knew what my path was. And that's why I can't be dissuaded off of it, because the turtle told me that Pele sent him. And we all know you don't mess with Pele.
And that gives you your clarity and surety of purpose.
Right. The turtle told me, and it was not a request for help. It was not pitiful. It was not begging. It was a command. The turtle said, "Help me." And so I've been doing that ever since. And I think many other people are similarly inspired by their love of nature. I know Travis told me he became an engineer because he loved the reefs. in West Maui, and it inspired him.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, when I grew up on this river called the Mississinawa River, it's in Indiana, I was a turtle because when I was little, they couldn't keep me out of the water. And there was a lot of human and cow and other waste, and I ended up getting very, very sick from it. I had impetigo and all kinds of open. We ended up having to move away from the home on the river because it was not habitable. And I look around here, and everyone is very happy with the environment here, as they should be. But I don't want anyone to feel like I felt, And the truth is that that's the direction that we may be headed in. So, it's very important to me. There's nothing more important in a way.
Than creating sustainable solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we're about. There are no problems, only opportunities for success.
And it's interesting because I'm more in the social realm. That's my expertise, and it's the same. It's, I guess, would be called grist for the mill. That it's that every time there's a problem, like if you notice with a relationship with somebody that everything's all nice and then there's a problem, and either it can separate you or you can then create a more of an intimacy, a trust. And so it's like there's always something that comes that that it takes us deeper, that makes us wiser. And so the same thing that you're talking about on the physical realm, which is waste, that I won't use the other word because this is a polite show, is actually a food, and it always comes back around. And the Native Hawaiians knew this, and that's what the whole fish ponds were, and we can go back to that, and there's going to have to be a shift in Western culture to see that, but to remember, like you said, we are all one system. We are all one people. We are all one race, and then we are part of the planet Earth, and we're one part of that ecosystem.
I'm glad you mentioned the social aspect, Netra, because one of the really alarming things to me as a water quality professional was about 10 years ago, the industry journals started predicting water wars. That's how serious the world water shortage is. If we don't have adequate water for everyone, not only to drink, but to grow food and to use for their business purposes, it can lead to social unrest, to violence, and to war. And that's not my prediction, that's the prediction of the water resources industry. So that is really also part of why I'm so dedicated to this. We can't let these issues divide us. We need to come together and solve this now. We're totally capable. So let's do it.
And we're so blessed because our mayor is a wastewater engineer in his background. So I mean, in some ways we couldn't be luckier.
Again, why Maui's the perfect place.
Yeah.
And this is the perfect time.
And then you were telling me the other day about how the Middle East, because they don't have water, they've got oil, and so they're kind of using the oil as a leverage to get water, and that's part of what the whole oil issue is and Middle East issue is.
I recommend everyone read Stephen Solomon's book called Water. It's about the epic struggle of civilizations and how they rise and fall based on how well they handle their water resources. It's very eye-opening, and it addresses that.
So I guess you've talked about where you would like Maui to go. Anything more specifically, or anything that you would like from the public to help with this?
Well, I think it's very difficult for the public because it's so complex. So I would just say keep trying to learn about it. EPA has a great website that has a lot of good information. Water Environment Federation, WEF.org, has wonderful information on wastewater treatment and water resources. The more informed our public is, the better off we all are.